Interesting, interesting stuff going on right now in the Republican Party that's really worth talking about. I try not to have the focus of the show be Donald Trump, although it's kind of hard to ignore at times. But increasingly, I'm coming to the conclusion that the guy who really runs the Republican Party, or at least leads and guides the Republican Party, is Joe Scarborough. I mean this seriously. Morning Joe was the leading cheerleader for Donald Trump before and during the about 4/5 of the Republican primary. Donald Trump was on Morning Joe like sometimes every day. I mean, they promoted the hell out of Donald Trump, and the rest of the network fell into line as MSNBC becomes more and more of, as Andy Lack has come in to be Phil Griffin's boss. Now it's kind of becoming the cloth coat Republican, to use a Richard Nixon phrase, network. Right. In fact, they even released an ad saying, if we seem to be tilting a little more to the right, or words to that effect, and they had pictures of Nicole Wallace and all these other right-wingers that are now actually being paid as regular staffers on MSNBC. So Scarborough driving the Republican Party, I think, is a very real thing. And I was astonished this morning to hear Joe Scarborough go off on a rant about how Donald Trump is not a Republican. He'd never been a Republican. How can you be a Republican when for the first 65 years of your life you've called yourself a Democrat? I doubt Donald Trump was calling himself a Democrat when he was 10 years old. But let's say up until the time you're 65 years old, you call yourself a Democrat. He pointed out that Trump voted for Obama. Trump voted for Bill Clinton. Trump voted for Al Gore. Trump gave money to the Clinton Foundation. Trump gave money to Democratic candidates. Trump was palling around with the Democratic candidates. And Scarborough pointed out at some length this morning on his program, and repeatedly, that the day before Donald Trump declared his candidacy for president, and I reported on this back months ago when it happened, that he said that the day before he had like an hour and a half long conversation on the phone with Bill Clinton. So the clear implication that Scarborough was putting out, and that I frankly think the Republican Party is listening to and taking to heart, is that Donald Trump is a Manchurian candidate inside the Republican Party whose purpose there is to destroy the Republican Party, and that he was goaded on in that role by Bill Clinton in order to make sure that his wife became president. Bill Clinton's wife. That would be Hillary. It's kind of a bizarre theory, but it has a certain level of plausibility to it, to the point that Republicans are now having an open discussion about how do we replace Donald Trump if he decides he's no longer going to be the party's nominee. See, here's the problem. I mean, Trump is just like saying wild stuff. This Joe Scarborough this morning. He said, Scarborough said on Wednesday's episode of Morning Joe, as a panel discussion concerns about Trump, how Trump might handle national security. At one point, Scarborough said Trump even asked, this is a post by Kate Pete over at, well, actually, it's from theweek.com. Kate Pete reposted it over at DU. At one point, Scarborough said Trump even asked, if we can have them, why can't we use them? Now, Trump, well, here, I'll give you as Morning Joe co-host Joe Scarborough tells it, Donald Trump asked not once, not twice, but 3 times about nuclear weapons during a foreign policy briefing with experts. Trump asked 3 times in an hour briefing, why can't we use nuclear weapons? If we have them, why can't we use them, said Trump. After the panel managed to wipe the stunned looks off their faces, Scarborough's co-host Mika Brzezinski fired off a warning, be careful, America, and be careful, Republican leaders. Right. Trump also says he's worried about rigged elections. Now, what's the rigging of the elections that he's worried about? The fact that federal judges have struck down now 4 states' voter suppression laws. North Dakota was the 4th one. It went down yesterday. So you got Texas, North Dakota, North Carolina, and Wisconsin. Those 4 states, the voter suppression laws have been struck down by federal judges Because basically, well, the one in North Carolina was the most explicit, the ruling by the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, in which they said, this is a federal court, in which they said, they just came right out and said, Republican lawmakers asked for data from the experts on the differences between black voters and white voters in terms of the types of ID that they tend to use and the patterns of their voting. And what they found was that black voters tended to be early voters. They tended in particular to be Sunday voters, the whole souls to the polls thing. People go to church and then, go vote. And that they tended to use, particularly in poorer areas or in inner cities where people don't own cars, they tended to use ID other than driver's licenses. And there's a wide variety of IDs available that are not driver's licenses. So then what the Republicans did in these states, particularly North Dakota, is they explicitly made illegal, and Texas as well. They said, okay, what do white people use for ID? Oh, concealed carry permits? Cool. We'll make those something you can use to vote. Black people don't use those. So, so Trump is saying that because these 4 states have lost their voter suppression laws, he thinks the election is rigged. Right? He says, people are going to walk in, they're going to vote maybe 10 times. Who knows? I just hear things. I just feel it. Right. So anyhow, if Trump resigns, ABC News just did a piece on this. ABC News has learned that senior party officials are so frustrated they're exploring ways to replace Trump on the ballot. Now, let me tell you what the frustration is about. It's not about Khizr Khan. It's not about, Trump. Oh, man, the list is so long, saying stupid things. If we have nukes, why can't we use them? It's about Trump's opposition to the TPP, which the Republicans intend to push through Congress after the elections. They fully intend to. Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan are unambiguous and clear about this. They're going to have a vote on the TPP. And Trump is fighting that. Trump is opposed to that. That's the number one piece of their opposition. And then the straw that broke the camel's back was yesterday when Trump came out and said, I'm not yet ready to endorse Paul Ryan and John McCain, even though Paul Ryan and John McCain have already endorsed Trump. So what does the Republican Party do? Well, first of all, ABC News says Trump would have to drop out by early September. So you got about 5 weeks to give the party enough time to choose a replacement and get that next nominee's name on the ballot in enough states to win. And the RNC bylaws say that, there's no provision for forcing a candidate out. They can only be replaced if they, by reason of death, declination, in other words, I choose not to run, or otherwise of the Republican candidate. I guess that otherwise is a pretty broad stroke, but it doesn't empower the RNC to kick him out. And under this rule, the Republican National Committee members representing any state would be entitled to cast the same number of votes as said state was entitled to cast at the National Convention. So basically, the 100 and some odd members, 168 members of the RNC, this is the core, they would pick the new Republican candidate, who, by the way, will be supported by the Koch brothers, even though they say, we're not supporting Donald Trump. They are spending hundreds of millions of dollars to support down-ballot Republicans in a get-out-the-vote effort. So if they can generate another 5 or 10 million voters this year, get them to the polls to vote for, down-ballot Republicans, Kelly Ayotte and whatnot, do you think while they're in the voting booth, they're not going to vote for the Republican presidential candidate?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Thus, all of the money the Koch brothers are spending, since all of it is supporting Republican candidates, is also supporting Donald Trump. We'll be back.
To watch more clips from our programs, hit the Watch More Videos button over here. And please be sure to hit the handy-dandy subscribe button so you'll always be up to date. Tag, you're it.